And now joining us is Martin Sherman. Hello, Martin. How are you today?
Okay, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, well, everything's good over here at this end. I know over on the other side, things are perhaps not so good right now.
No, but that's what happens when you take insane decisions for 4 decades. I think, I wrote an article in a newspaper that no longer exists called Davar, which was at one stage the most important newspaper in Israel. It was the official newspaper of the Labour Party. And they let me publish an article there before the disengagement in, I think it was August 1992. And I warned what would happen if the IDF pulled out of Gaza, because at that time, Moshe Arens, who was Minister of Defense, and Yitzhak Rabin, who was Prime Minister, were talking about abandoning Gaza. And I said, what happens if you pull the IDF out of the Gaza Strip, where there is no well-established civil society institutions? The most radical elements will take control, because the less radical elements will not be prepared to use the same tactics. As soon as the radical elements take over, Israel will be forced to seal the borders, which will create social and economic distress for the inhabitants, which will express itself in attacks across the border against Israel, which will force Israel to retaliate. But without a presence in the Gaza Strip, it will be very difficult to differentiate between uninvolved civilians and militants, and so we will encounter international censure. And that's precisely what happened. It's not rocket science, it's just a sound political science, which has been disregarded for decades here on the altar of political correctness.
Right. Well, that's we've seen this happen before. People think they're making the right decisions, but they turn out to be the wrong ones. We saw that with Chamberlain, Peace in Our Time, when he realized. But the thing was, in the context of that time period, people still had clear memories of World War I and the slaughter that took place there, and the disaster that followed, and they wanted to avoid that at all costs. The United States, were isolationists by and large on both sides of the divide, both on the on the right and the left, and so basically people are a product of their time. And looking back, you realize where they made mistakes, but it was very hard to see.
But no, it wasn't looking back mistake, but this was before the disengagement, before they pulled out the IDF. Anybody who had an inkling about the elements of political science, the theory of the nation, the theory of the nation state, knew that this was going to happen. And you know what? Even if you couldn't be 100% sure that it would happen, you had to be 100% sure that it wouldn't happen in order to do so. When I was younger and thinner, one of my hobbies was free fall parachuting.
Really?
And during my time as a free fall parachuter, the main parachute didn't open twice, and I came down on a reserve parachute. But which is the moral of the story here is you can always hope for the best. But you definitely should plan for the worst.
That's
and
right.
Israel has not been doing.
You must have benched Komal after that, right?
Yeah, well, Israel has been backing away from confrontations which it can win until it's going to back itself into a confrontation which it can't. And I think we were. I don't think lucky is really the appropriate word, but I can't think of anyone. I think it was fortunate that this happened when it did, and not a little later where they were better prepared and we were less prepared.
Right. Well, this is it. It's very hard to decide what to do. I mean, sometimes it looks obvious what right decision is, but then you're afraid of what everybody else is going to think about it. It takes a leader sometimes has to make some very unpopular decisions for the good of the state, and the consequences be damned, as they say. You have to just go straight ahead and do it. But unfortunately,
I don't think that is the case here. I don't think the leaders took unpopular decisions. They took very popular decisions. Leaving Gaza was quite popular because the population, the citizenry here was hoodwinked. The same thing with Oslo. Now, Oslo wasn't an unpopular decision. It was a popular decision that was taken because the population was totally misled. And unfortunately, the calcitrant realities brought everyone to their senses with a hard bump. But I'm a rather unforgiving attitude towards Israeli leadership because I think they've made blunder after blunder on the altar of political correctness. And one of the most important fiascos is the fact that they've totally ignored the sphere of public diplomacy, putting Israel's case forcibly on the international agenda. And now there's these outbursts of anti-Semitism because Israel's allowed itself to become so defamed and its image so distorted that it's difficult to associate with Israel. It's been totally misrepresented, and Israel's done very little about it. It's spent pitiful amounts of money on presenting its case abroad. It's spent pitiful amounts of money in opposing the Palestinian narrative. Quite the opposite. Ever since Oslo, they've basically adopted the Palestinian narrative, at the base of which is that the Palestinians deserve self-determination and statehood. And once you've accepted that false assumption, it's very difficult to justify Israeli action.
Well, that's very true. And the thing is, are you saying the present administration plundered, or you mean talking about Netanyahu, or are you talking about going back a ways with previous administrations as well? No, I'm not one of Netanyahu's greatest critics. I think he's got a lot of it to his credit, but in the field of public diplomacy, it's one of the issues that he's been very, very remiss. Israel spent a pitiful amount. If Israel were to spend 1% of the state budget on public diplomacy, that would be between $1 billion and $1.5 billion. With $1 billion and $1.5 billion, you can change a lot of minds and win a lot of hearts. But they haven't done that. They've totally, what Melanie Phillips once said, abandoned the battlefield of ideas. They've let the Palestinians set the agenda. They've let the Palestinians set the bounds of legitimacy and what is not legitimate. And there's a lot to roll back now. Well, it's very true. The Palestinians have definitely been winning the public relations war. There's no question. And
I think it's quite opposite. We're losing it. Not that they're winning it. We're losing it. And I think there's a difference. I mean, the results are the same. But we're losing it because to win, you actually have to take part in the battle. And for decades, we haven't taken part in the battle.
Yeah, and why is that, Martin? Why has Israel not countered all the propaganda and everything coming from the other side?
Well, I think in many ways there's a deficiency in the psyche of Israeli-born Jews. They seem to take the existence of Israel for granted. And they didn't really think that they had to justify themselves. They thought it was more important to buy aeroplanes and develop technology. And they've done extremely well. In many cases, Israel is the leader in virtually every field of human endeavor except political leadership. And I think for some reason, because they were brought up in an atmosphere where Israel's always been around, as opposed to someone like myself who was born before Israel and was born abroad, you have a much better sense of the vulnerability and the fragility of the situation here. That's the kind of explanation that I give myself. I think in many ways, on a different level completely, Netanyahu was afraid of losing control of the political diplomacy effort, and so basically he strangled it. He wanted to be a soloist without an orchestra, and I think that undermined his performance. Netanyahu is an excellent soloist when it comes to public diplomacy, but he needs an orchestra, and he never fostered that.
Right, but the thing is, all they have to do really is just point out history, show the truth. They don't, the other side has distorted it in such a way, made themselves into victims, and in fact they are victims, but they're victims of themselves and their Arab neighbors, and they've broken every ceasefire there's ever been. They rejected a two-state solution when they had the opportunity, back in 1948. And they've stayed. I mean, the Palestinian people are the only refugees in history that have remained refugees for generations. Everybody else, they're refugee. The first generation refugees, and then the next aren't. And yet, the Israelis have, all they have to do is just point out these facts, these historical facts.
Well, you have to point them out. It's not just not a matter of articulating it. You have to force it on the public agenda, because there's no countervailing noise there, and so today you have to overcome a lot of background noises. I mean, you look at Egypt's behavior in the current conflict. They would rather let the Palestinians stay under Israeli fire, be bombarded by the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli army, than let them escape into Egypt. So how much do they care for them? Every military conflict from the Second World War up until the recent events in the Ukraine and Armenia, whenever there's been battle, there's been large-scale movements of population, and other countries have accepted them. Everywhere except the Arabs. The Arabs use the Palestinians as a tool to undermine Israel's geographical viability. I mean, they don't give a fig about the Palestinians themselves. I mean, they're discriminated against in Arab countries. I knew somebody. He was a Palestinian who I met him in Israel, who studied at University of Damascus in Syria, and he happened to be on vacations in the summer. I was working on an archaeological dig for a university, and he was I think the foreman for the Bedouins who were working there, and he was telling me that in Syria, they stereotype. They say the Palestinians are all lazy, that they're thieves, that they just want to live on United Nations money, and they'll steal whatever they can, and nobody likes them, nobody wants them, and this was he's talking about an Arab nation in Lebanon. They have limited access to healthcare, education. They're not allowed to own land. Yeah. I mean, but Israel doesn't point this out. Everybody talks about they don't. And when they do point it out, they don't point it out forcefully enough. As I say, the amount of noise you make, it depends on the amount of resources that you allot to your effort. And if you're making a ridiculously small amount of effort, then you're going to get a ridiculously small amount of results. I mean, it's not rocket science. I think Israel has been extremely remiss in conducting the way it projects its image and generating its freedom of movement for the army. Because basically, what do you need diplomacy for? To generate the freedom of action to use your army. And if your army is restricted, it doesn't matter how many abba-dabba super sophisticated jets you've got if you can't use them the way you want to. And basically every single security threat that Israel now faces is because of the false doctrine of land for peace. I mean, when we pulled out of Gaza, it became a threat. We pulled out of South Lebanon, it became a threat. We pulled out of Sinai, and we haven't really seen it, but there's a lot of building up there. If it hadn't have been for Sisi taking over from Morsi, I'm not sure what Sinai would be looking like now on the long border. There were terror attacks across the border in the last decade, but because of the firm action of the Egyptian army there. They've been held in check. But every single place that Israel has withdrawn from, it's failed. And we keep trying and trying and trying, and no one wants to face the fact that trying to foist self-determination on the Palestinians is not going to work. It's not going to work. It's going to bring disaster to the Jews, and even greater disaster to the Palestinians. And look what's happening to them.
Right. Exactly. It's right. It's right there. I mean, there's no question about it. As I've pointed out before on this show, that had in 1948 the Arabs won the war, there wouldn't be a Palestinian state. There would be a larger Syria, a larger Egypt, a larger Jordan, maybe to be a very small Palestinian state that would be dependent on those other countries. Because you can see what happened. I mean, look, Gaza was annexed and all but named by Egypt. What was then Transjordan just boldly annexed the whole West Bank and East Jerusalem and recreated themselves as the Kingdom of Jordan. And nobody said a word. There was no illegal occupation talk or anything like that. And it took for 19 years. Right. So, but the thing is, and they always talk about how here you see the protesters saying, this is all the result of 75 years of occupation. Well, it wasn't 75 years. First of all, as we say, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza was occupied by Egypt and by Jordan for many years. And then, as we've said before, was Gaza, Israel pulled out every soldier, every settler left Gaza. And what did they do? They destroyed the industry that the American philanthropists had left, the greenhouses that had left intact in order to give them a head start. They elect Hamas. Well, okay, that might have been basically because a reaction to the corruption of the PA, but still, they elected them, and that's how they got their foot in the door. And they haven't had an election since. They've been there running things and making trouble for everybody, starting with Israel.
Yeah, well, if you look at the latest polls, there's overwhelming support, both in Gaza and even more so in Judea and Samaria, for the massacre on the 7th of October. There's no expression of regret or of contriteness. They're very proud of what they've done. And I'm just surprised with the Israeli leadership that the penny hasn't dropped yet. Not enough. I mean, I can't understand why the fighting is taking so long. I think there should have been far more aggressive and violent response. I understand there's the problem of the hostages, but you can't. If we're going to confine our response, we're not going to do well for the hostages, and we're certainly not going to do well for the nation.
Absolutely. Well, anyhow, I hope that things work out, that they can find a solution. I know it's not easy, but I'm sure that with the help of God and the brains of man, they will eventually come up with something. Anyhow, well, thank you so much, Martin. I really appreciate having you with us, and looking forward to having you joining us again very soon.
Okay, thank you for the invitation.
Okay, have a wonderful day.